Hey everybody, back for another video. So I actually had a video of mine actually get some attention recently. It actually got several comments, one called "'Tis Better to Have Loved and Lost." So thank you to the people who commented on that. Mostly they were interesting civil comments, so I'm glad for that. Um, yeah, I don't think anybody really had much of a rebuttal to what I said, just giving their opinions of like the MGTOW movement and things like that. But thanks for contributing to the discussion. I hope that I at least raise some good questions. So anyway, I wanted to talk about another subject kind of along similar lines today. And it's something I was thinking about because, well, I'm a fan of the TV show Mystery Science Theater 3000. And, sometimes I like to watch old episodes of it for fun because, well, it always makes me laugh. Even the weaker episodes tend to have a few good laughs in them. So, it's something, it's an easy way to cheer me up when I'm feeling down. So anyway, I watched an episode that I'd seen before years ago called Catalina Caper, and I remember just it being a very funny episode. So recently I rewatched it, and if you've never seen the movie, it's like all movies on MST3K. It's not a very consequential movie. It was an attempt at making a beach movie back in the '60s, and it had like songs and love stories, and they combined it with this sort of like heist plot line of like thieves and law enforcement and intrigue, and it was silly. It was poorly written, poorly acted. The film making quality was not the best, obviously. That's why it ends up on a show like Mystery Science Theater. But anyway, the reason I'm talking about this now is because I actually think the soundtrack to the movie is not bad. Some of the songs in it are pretty catchy and good, and I have kind of a soft spot for the '60s and its whole aesthetic. So, I enjoy it for that reason. And there's one song in the movie called uh, I think it's just called Book of Love, according to the ending credits, and sung by Carol Connors, who you probably never heard of, but I think she was a singer who had a few hits back in the day, and by this point in her career, she was still trying to make a living doing music. So, and I think maybe she still performs today. I'm not sure, but she's not a household name, but she's had a steady career in music. But she sings this song called Book of Love, and it comes to this scene where a bunch of the girls get mad at the guys and they all storm off and they go back to their boat and they're all standing on opposite sides of the boat. And then Carol Connor says, "We got to do something about this." And so then she and the band start playing this song, and then they all start dancing together, and suddenly it's like, oh, this tension is all gone, and they all kiss and make up basically. So they're not mad at each other anymore. Really cheesy, yeah, I know. But what I wanted to talk about was the song "Book of Love" and the lyrics, because the lyrics, in keeping with the plot, basically talk about how boys and girls fight sometimes, but in the end they always get back together, is kind of the main lyrical theme of it. And I just thought, do you ever hear themes like that in pop music today? Is that really a thing, or is it all about like I don't know. I don't listen to pop music today, but I feel like when I do, I never hear anything talking about those sort of cutesy, lovey-dovey sort of sentiments of like, yeah, boys and girls always find a way to get together eventually, and that's just the way of the world. And I think I can think of other songs that kind of have similar themes from that era, like in the early '70s, the Grassroots had the song "Sooner or Later," saying, "Sooner or later, love is gonna find you, love is gonna get you, and you'll have to give into it, and you won't be able to stop it." And I don't know. You read the lyrics, it seems like it's addressing a girl very specifically, saying like, who's being kind of cold toward him, but he's saying, eventually, you love me, and you're not gonna be able to deny it anymore, and sooner or later, it's gonna happen for us. So maybe it's a slightly different shade of meaning for that one, but it's still that kind of idea that love is just inevitable and it will happen to everybody eventually. And I'm not saying there weren't ever any songs about people talking about loneliness. Like I think of the song "When Will I Be Loved" by the Everly Brothers. That's another one expressing a desire to finally find real love after years of heartbreak and heartache. And I'm just thinking about how, I think in those days in the '60s, it was kind of assumed that everybody would eventually get married for the most part, and with rare exceptions. Maybe I can't remember if I've shared this example on this channel before, but I remember watching an episode of Ozzie and Harriet years ago, and there's some episode where they're in a shopping mall or something, and there's some guy doing some like product demonstration, and the specifics aren't important, but Ozzy happens to be passing by, and he says, "Excuse me, sir, is your wife here?" And he says, "Oh, yes, she is." And I thought it was funny that he would ask, "Is your wife here?" Just assuming that he's married or that he has a wife. And because I'm thinking back in the 50s, yeah, that probably was just taken for granted that like most people were married, especially older people. And yeah, I remember one time I asked my mother, "Did you ever, like when you were growing up, did you just assume you'd be married one day?" And she says, "Oh yeah," like she just took it for granted that one day she'd be married. And I guess my mother's a very normal person and a very nice person, so she probably could take it for granted, so that she'd find a husband eventually. But it's kind of funny to think about how our culture has really changed a lot, and what some people used to take for granted, that love would eventually find everybody. Even when I talk to my grandmother sometimes about, in the past I've talked to my grandmother about how lonely I am, and she says, "Well, you know what they say, there's somebody for everyone out there." And I'm thinking, well, maybe in your day that mentality made sense, but we've actually seen that no, love's not inevitable. A lot of people do end up alone. Under the right circumstances, where hypergamy runs rampant, where there's no checks on it, where there's no cultural impetus for people to get married and start families, when all these things are discouraged and even scorned. I mean, it's very easy to drive men and women apart and make them resent each other, hate each other, and see themselves in an adversarial way. So I don't know. It's just funny to realize that, the idea of men and women getting together and, making children, it's like, it seems like it's just one of the most natural, unavoidable things ever on paper. But it's like, you see those, like the movie Bambi, for example, you see that where it's spring and everybody's Twitter pated because like that's just what animals do when springtime comes. They start seeking out a mate to start breeding and perpetuating their respective species. And humans, it should be no different. We want to breed too, but it's actually a lot easier to sever that relationship than people realize. With psychological abuse that our society gives us today, with all the bad programming that our society gives us today, you know, love is a lot less inevitable than people think it is. Not that the desire for love, not that the desire for companionship goes away, because I really do think most people who are alone are miserable. I know I am. I know I want it. I want love, intimacy, companionship more than anything, almost on earth. But as of right now, I don't have those things. But yeah, it's just incredible to think about how much things have changed, and how even just 50 or so years ago, things people took for granted are no longer are. So anyway, I guess that's about all I have to say on this subject. So I'll talk to you later. Bye.